Christmas tree, oh Christmas tree, the leaves are so unchanging.
How we're doing, everybody? This is Libb Thims. We're doing the Origin of the Christmas Tree special today. We've got special guests Thor and Fernando, and we're going to ask the question, multiple choice, where did the Christmas tree originate?
Christmas tree, oh Christmas tree, the leaves are so unchanging.
We either have choice one from the Germans, who brought it over to America.
It is Germany that is credited with the tradition of Christmas trees as we know it today during the 16th century when devout Christians brought decorated trees into their homes.
It was German settlers of Pennsylvania which were the first ones to display a Christmas tree in America.
Not only green, but summer's here, but also winter's cold and drear.
Choice two from the Scandinavians, who morphed their Thor oak tree down and got changed over into the Christmas tree.
In the earliest history of Scandinavia, it was traditional during the celebration of the winter solstice, December 21st, to bring an evergreen tree into the home and decorate it.
One giant oak tree was called the Oak of Thor. If anyone cut it down, they believed the god Thor would strike them dead.
Goodness gracious, then what happened?
Christmas tree, oh Christmas tree, the leaves are so unchanging.
Well, a Christian named Boniface came to northern Germany to tell them about Jesus. They said, "We don't believe in Jesus, we believe in Thor. Look, here's his tree." Boniface had to find a way to show them Thor wasn't real, so guess what he did? I think I know. He picked up an axe and chopped down the tree.
What happened?
Nothing. So everyone realized Thor was fake and started believing in Jesus instead.
That's amazing! But, where do Christmas trees come in?
Well, according to the story, Boniface then pointed to a small fir tree that was growing right next to Thor's oak tree and said, "This will be your new symbol."
Oh Christmas tree, much pleasure thou canst give me.
We've got three, the Babylonians, who had the story of Tammuz, who grew into a Christmas tree.
December 25th is the day that the sun begins to rise higher in altitude against the horizon in the northern hemisphere, resulting in longer days. In the occult world, this is meant to represent the return of the sun, which in Babylon was Nimrod reincarnated as Tammuz.
The story referred to here is the Sumerian-Babylonian myth of the god Nimrod, who marries the goddess Semiramis, shortly after which Nimrod is killed, but then reanimated by the goddess Semiramis, who with she procreates and makes the child Tammuz.
In a nutshell, the story goes that Semiramis was Nimrod's mother, who he incestuously married. Nimrod died at some point in his reign, and Semiramis bore a son not long after on December 25th, who she claimed to be supernaturally conceived by reanimating Nimrod's dead body.
Today in Vatican City, they're holding a celebration of the birth of the Roman Catholic Sun-Child. The first thing I find interesting is that they've actually placed the depiction directly underneath the Star of Ishtar, the Eastern Star of the mystery religions. If that isn't blatant enough, you can see that the star is being propped up by an Egyptian obelisk. Then, of course, you've got this giant Kabbalistic tree, and also accompanied by other ancient symbology that should make it absolutely clear that this represents the birth of the sun god of the Babylonian mystery schools.
After Nimrod's death, his so-called mother wife Semiramis propagated the doctrine of the survival of Nimrod as a spirit being. She claimed a full-grown evergreen tree sprang overnight from a dead tree stump, which symbolizes the springing forth unto new life of the dead Nimrod.
The following is a 900 BC carving of Nimrod, reborn as an evergreen tree, out of the top of which a bird carrying the newborn son arises.
On each anniversary of his birth, she claimed, Nimrod would visit the evergreen tree and leave gifts upon it. December 25th was always the birthday of Nimrod.
She gave birth to Tammuz on December 25th. That is the birthday of the Babylonian sun god, December 25th. And I think it's important probably to point out, see, we went into captivity in Babylon. We were involved in the worship of Tammuz. We know his birthday was December 25th.
Oh, Christmas tree, much pleasure thou canst give me.
We've got 4 of the Egyptians or 5, fill in the blank.
We came out of Egypt. We know that the Egyptian sun god Ra was born on December 25th.
In the beginning there was darkness and an ocean of chaos. From it emerged a mound, and on it rose the sun, Ra. Then the Bennu bird, the phoenix, flew up, and its first cry set the world in motion.
What this last video is attempting to say is that at Heliopolis, the creation myth promulgated was that first there was a flood, the 150-day annual Nile River flood, out of which a land mound arose, represented by the pyramids, from the top of which the Bennu bird burst forth, carrying the sun on its head, either as the form of Ra, the god Atum, or the combined god Ra Atum. The great-grandson of Ra Atum was Osiris, who is the world's first dying and rising god, represented by the Orion constellation. The child produced by Osiris and Isis is Horus, the world's first man god.
How often has the Christmas tree afforded me the greatest glee?
Now we come to the oldest known version of the Christmas tree myth, that as was told in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed that the Egyptian civilization mirrored what was in the sky. They considered the Nile River to be representative of the Milky Way, the 3 pyramids at Giza to be representative of the 3 belts of the Orion constellation, and the 14 stars of the Orion constellation to be representative of the god Osiris, who each December could be visibly seen to rise from a dead position to a standing vertical position throughout the month. They considered this to be the death and rebirth of the god Osiris, which they told through the astro-theological story that one day Set, Osiris' evil brother, tricked Osiris into getting into a chest, which he tossed into the Nile River. Isis, the wife, sister, lover of Osiris, representative of the star Sirius, tracked the chest down to the banks of Byblos, where she had found that the chest had grown into a tamarisk tree, an Egyptian evergreen tree. She cut the chest out and hid it in the Egyptian delta. Set, however, tracked the chest down again and cut Osiris into 14 pieces, each piece representative of one of the stars of the Orion constellation.
A golden time in which Osiris ruled. But Seth, his brother, grew jealous, betrayed and killed Osiris. The world fell prey to chaos as Set cut up the body of Osiris and hid each of its 14 pieces. Blood and darkness came over Egypt. But Isis, faithful consort of Osiris, searched every corner of the land, gathered the parts of her beloved, and bound them in linen.
However, she could not find the phallus, and she fabricated a golden phallus from which she impregnated herself with the seed of Osiris and bore a son, the son Horus, the divine child. It is Horus that became the first established man-god, first pharaoh.
In that place later stood the holy city of Heliopolis, a rounded pillar crowned with the holy Benben, symbol of that first mound of creation.
Here we see a few artistic depictions of Osiris as the Christmas tree. Above left we see Osiris trapped in the chest made by Set, where the tamarisk tree grows up and surrounds his chest. Or below left we see the tamarisk tree, the Egyptian evergreen tree, with the body of Osiris in its trunk. At right we see two Egyptians worshipping Osiris, reborn as an evergreen tree, out of which Ra, in the form of the sun, is reborn. Here we see two variants of the same myth. At right, the original Egyptian version. At left, the reformulated Sumerian version. In the Egyptian version, as discussed, Osiris was killed, and then from a dead tree stump, he turned into a full-grown evergreen tree. And each year, he would visit the tree and leave gifts. At left, Nimrod was killed, and from a dead stump, his new body was regrown as an evergreen tree. A diagram of which is shown here. A pep is the snake that the sun would do battle with nightly, according to Egyptian mythology. This, according to Jared Miller from his 2010 Encyclopedia of Egyptian Mythology, is the true origin of the Christmas tree.
Christmas tree, oh Christmas tree, much pleasure thou canst give me.
In ancient times, in Egypt, myths told of how in Heliopolis a bird was born from the midst of the flames which rose out of the summit of a tree. The phoenix, aka the Bino bird, symbolized the morning sun rising out of that fiery glow of dawn, which dies away as the newborn luminary ascends the sky, and hence was regarded as the bird of Ra. But since the dead sun was held to become an Osiris, and the new sun to arise from the embalmed body of the old, represented by the Osiris evergreen tree, which had been duly brought to Heliopolis, in like manner also the phoenix, aka the Bino bird, was supposed to be a form of Osiris, in which the god returned to his own country. Over time, Osiris as an evergreen tree, out of which Ra is born, became, in 1300 BC, symbolized by Osiris as the Dajjed pillar, represented by the evergreen tree or the backbone of Osiris, out of which the sun in the form of Ra is born. The following diagram will help give us an idea of how the ancient Egyptian evergreen tree tradition slowly migrated out of Egypt to the rest of the world. At left we see the evergreen tree out of which the star sun or the god Ra is being reborn in the form of the phoenix, which originated in the Egyptian city of Heliopolis, or City of the Sun, in 3100 BC. The green area shows the maximum extent of the Egyptian dynasty in the year 1500 BC, where we see that in Byblos, as carved on their walls, we see the tomb of Osiris, out of which an evergreen tree is growing. By 1155 BC, with the death or murder of Ramses III, the Assyrians began to take over, and the Assyrian Empire grew and took over Egypt all the way down to Thebes. During this time, there was a mixing of the gods of Egypt, Assyria, and Canaanite. To explain, we'll take a look at Gaston Maspero's 9-volume History of Egypt, Chaldea, Syria, Babylonia, and Assyria. In Volume 6, Chapter 2, we see that after the death of Ramses II, the Assyrian Empire began to rise. The cessation of the Egyptian authorities over countries in which it had so long prevailed did not at once do away with the deep impression which it had made under their constitution and customs. In Thebes, for example, they were adopting the imported worship of Baal and Astarte, who are the Sumerian, Mesopotamian equivalents of Set and Isis. During this time, the Phoenician gods seemed to be subject to the same appropriating mania, for they came to be recognized in the indigenous deities of the Sayed and Delta. There was, at the outset, no trait in the character of Baalat, aka Lady of Byblos, by which she could be assimilated to Isis or Hathor. She was fierce, warlike, and licentious, and wept for her lover, while the Egyptian goddesses were accustomed to shed their tears for their husbands only. It was this element of a common grief, however, which served to associate the Phoenician and Egyptian goddesses, and to produce at length a strange blending by their persons and legends concerning them. The Lady of Byblos ended in becoming an Isis or a Hathor, and in playing in part assigned to the latter in the Osiris drama, shown by the Christmas tree. The priests, having come to recognize a fundamental agreement between their theology and that of Egypt, worked such that at Byblos, the most marked and numerous, as well as the most ancient examples of borrowing from the religions of the Nile were found. The theologians at Byblos imagined that the coffin of Osiris, after it had been thrown into the sea by Typhon or Set, represented by this box, had thrown up on land somewhere near the city at the foot of a tamarisk or evergreen tree, shown here, and that this tree in its rapid growth had gradually enfolded within it the trunk and body of Osiris in its case. Isis, who was traveling the world in quest of her husband, heard of this chest, and at once went to Byblos. She opened the mysterious tree trunk, anointing it with essences, and wrapped it in precious cloths. Osiris was buried, according to one version of the story, at Byblos. This tradition maintained, and it was in his honor that the festivals attributed by the vulgar to the young Adonis were really celebrated. The Assyrian Adon, together with the Set, Baal, synchristic god, and their associated tree, were transmitted in 600 AD to the newly forming Germanic Scandinavian Empire, and to the god Thor and his oak tree, which became the European Christmas tree. In short, what was the original Egyptian story of Horus, Set, and Osiris was culturally transmitted and reformulated into the Greek Assyrian story of Dionysus / Adonis, Balzer, and Thoros. As the Germanic Scandinavian Empire began to rise in 600 AD, this story was again retold into that of Odin, a reformulation of Adon, who has the sons Balder and Thor, which are rescripts of the name Balzer and Thoros, the son of Adon. The man-god bird Horus becomes the man-god Thor with his winged helmet, and the death of Balder leads to a chain of events which brings about the destruction of the gods at Ragnarok, after which there is a great flood, which itself is based on the annual Nile River flood, from which 2 humans survive, and Balder is reborn again in the New World. At the end of every year, December 10th through January 8th, the Egyptians had a 30-day festival called the Koak celebration, which is the equivalent of the modern Christmas season. On the last day of the festival, January 8th, they had a culminating ceremony called the raising of the Dajjal pillar, which represented the final rebirth of the god Osiris as an evergreen tree. In about 800 BC, the story of the death and rising of Osiris as an evergreen tree or Dajjal pillar was culturally transmitted to Greece, wherein Osiris became the god Dionysus, who is shown here in the form of an evergreen tree being raised in the equivalent Greek version of the Osiris raising of the Dajjal pillar ceremony.
Who knows the origin of the Christmas tree? We're going to take a look here. First question here, first answer. We've got Thor. What do you got to say?
Oh man, performing under pressure right here. Okay, what do I got? Christmas tree, origin, history. Let's say, fuck the history. It all gets lost in translation. That shit is a pagan symbol. Fucking, it's a relic from the old pagan winter solstice holidays. They used to celebrate it by displaying evergreen trees, which was a sign of something. Like, I don't know, like I said, it gets lost in translation, but...
Here we see Thor, who's named after the Scandinavian Germanic god Thor, digging in the right direction. Pagan, to clarify, means any religion that is non-Christian, hence Egyptian mythology is a pagan religion. That the story of the evergreen tree is lost in translation, however, is no longer the case, owing to what's called comparative religion and mythology, where we know that Horus became Thor in Germany, and in Rome Horus became the baby Jesus. The name Thor itself in Greek means the seed, in reference to the seed of Osiris, which made Horus.
However, she could not find the phallus, and she fabricated a golden phallus from which she impregnated herself with the seed of Osiris and bore a son, the son Horus, the divine child.
The main fucking fact here is that Christians rob this shit. That's the best thing that religion is good at. Religion loves to rob traditions and make it their own.
The so-called pagan theft theory, namely that the Christians stole the Christmas tree from pagans, however, is an incorrect assertion. Correctly, when people migrate, they carry their religious traditions with them. So it was that the Egyptian religion morphed as people migrated out of Egypt into the surrounding areas and into Northern Europe and America.
So when you look at this, don't think of little baby Jesus. I wish he was here right now. Cradle his head. I'd fucking kiss him.
Here we see the admission by Thor, owing to the fact that the state of religio-mythology in America is so atrophied that he is unaware that his own name is the Scandinavian Germanic equivalent of Jesus, both of which are the rescripted versions of the Egyptian Horus, and that the son coming out of the baby Jesus is but the newborn Ra coming out of Osiris, reborn as Horus, and that Osiris in Greco-Assyrian cultures became Adon, who became rewritten as Lord in Roman Christianity, who became the god Odin in Scandinavia.
But I'm not going to do that because fuck that. This is a pagan symbol.
Oh, Christmas tree, thy candle shines so brightly.
On an aside, we note that what was originally Osiris's day became Odin's day or Wednesday, that Horus's day became Thor's day or Thursday, and that the day of Isis, the wife of Osiris and mother of Horus, became, in Norse mythology, Frigga's day or Friday.
All right, that's a solid answer. Fernando, what do you got?
I got like 10 seconds, bro.
Go ahead, Fernando. Give us some answers here.
It came from the Christians.
What about the North Pole?
This bitch came from the North Pole, bro. Straight out of the
sir.
North Pole, bro.
Yes,
For
sir.
real.
North Pole is
what?
So Fernando thinks, like most Americans, that the Christmas tree comes from the North Pole, where Santa Claus lives with his reindeer and makes presents for little kids. The answer to this, in part, is that the story of Santa Claus riding in his sleigh with his reindeer is based on the older story of Thor, also called Donner in German, who wears red and rides a flying golden chariot pulled by two goats called Cracker and Ganasher. Now we already know that the predecessors to Thor, namely Osiris and Nimrod, both were known to put presents underneath the evergreen tree each Christmas. But how does the North Pole and the two goats get into the picture? The answer to this question is shown in the following diagram. Namely, in the original Egyptian version, Osiris, representative of the 14-point Orion constellation, was believed to be riding on his solar boat through the waters of the Milky Way. And when he went hunting, he went with his trusty dog Anubis, representative of the Canis Major constellation. In Greek mythology, this was recast into the story of Orion the Hunter, who went hunting with his two dogs, Canis Major and Canis Minor. And in Nordic mythology, this was recast in the story of Thor riding his chariot pulled by two flying goats. And in American folklore, the story was recast into that of Santa Claus with his flying sleigh being pulled by two reindeer. The hunting mallet turned hammer became a jingle bell, and the horns come into the picture per reason that the Egyptians in many cases believed that the sun chariot of Ra was pulled by horned animal gods. The North Pole comes into the picture because when the Egyptians built the pyramids, they aligned the north shaft of the king's chamber to the star Thuban, which was the North Pole star when the pyramid was built, and they aligned the king's south chamber to the star El-Netak, which is part of the belt of Orion. Hence, just as Osiris lives at the North Pole, so too does Santa Claus, as children are now told, live or reside at the North Pole.
What about baby Jesus? Was he born under the Christmas tree?
No, I don't believe that shit. But
No?
it has to come with, like, I believe that the Christians had something to do with, like, you know,
Stealing it?
maybe in
All
part,
right, 10
but,
seconds.
you know.
The following diagram shows from where the myth that Jesus was born in a manger near a Christmas tree originated. Specifically, during the Roman Recension in about 300 AD, theologians were forced into making a monotheistic religion out of a former polytheistic religion. Accordingly, in the original version shown here, which is carved on the walls of Dendera Temple in 0 AD, the time of the supposed birth of Jesus, we see Osiris, or the 13 pieces of his chopped up body, made into a mummy. The 14th piece is his missing phallus, which Isis fixates in the form of a golden phallus, and she herself turns into a kite and magically impregnates herself with the seed of Osiris to make the man god Horus. After which, or before which, Osiris is transformed into the evergreen tree, out of which the phoenix is born, carrying the sun, or sun god Ra, into the sky. Accordingly, Horus became Jesus, Isis became Mary. Osiris became God the Father. And the Persia tree became the Christmas tree. To conclude, some 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians looked up at the night sky in early December, and each day saw the dead Orion constellation rise to a vertical position as the reborn Orion constellation, or the reborn god Osiris in the form of the evergreen tree, at the end of the month of which, on December 25th, the sun would be reborn as the god Ra, which became Osiris as the Dajjal pillar, out of which the sun is born in the form of Ra, which was the centerpiece of the annual Chaos festival and the raising of the Dajjal pillar, which in Greece became the raising of the tree god Dionysus, which in modern American times is passed along to us as the annual December cutting and raising of the evergreen tree.